The silent house. The village of Bearwall had a way of carrying whispers louder than shouts. Dusty streets, tangled wheat fields, and walls that could hear. Everything in the village knew of Karam Din. He had once been a respected schoolmaster, known for his stern hand and sharp tongue. Parents brought their children to him trembling, but with hope. He carved discipline into their bones and believed in hard truths. But now, long retired and bowed by age, Karam Din lived in a house that echoed with silence. Not long ago, laughter had passed through those rooms, his son Irfan's laughter, to be exact. Irfan had been his only child, the last remaining piece of a wife lost many years before. When Irfan married Rashida, a modest, soft-spoken girl from a nearby village, Karam Din didn't protest. He merely nodded and muttered, "Let's see how she turns out." His love for Irfan was hidden, folded deep beneath layers of pride. But fate had its own cruelty. Irfan died in a road accident barely a year after the wedding. A slippery road, a faulty truck brake, and just like that, the future Karam Din had clung to vanished. Now only Rashida remained in the house, a widow at 24. She wore white, kept her eyes low, and moved like a ghost. The neighbors expected Karam Din to send her back to her parents, but he did not. Whether it was duty or shame, no one knew. Still, the house was heavy with bitterness. Karam Din did not speak unless necessary. He left food unfinished, grunted instead of giving thanks, and stared at the wall as Rashida swept around him like quiet wind. He saw her every day, yet never looked at her. In his heart, an ugly lie had taken root. She brought this curse. She was the shadow in Irfan's light. Rashida, on her part, never complained. Each morning before dawn, she would light incense and whisper prayers in a voice only God could hear. She kept the house clean, his clothes washed, his meals ready. Even when he threw away the tea she brought, too cold, he'd say without tasting, "She simply made another." The villagers noticed. They began to talk. Some pitied the girl. Others said she was scheming, trying to win the old man's favor for inheritance. One woman whispered, "A widow living alone with her father-in-law?" Strange things happened behind closed doors. Karam Din heard the rumors. He scowled, not at their vulgarity, but at the shame they might bring him. Yet he said nothing. Not to them. Not to her. One evening, as the sun bled into the fields, Rashida brought him his tea. She placed it on the wooden stool beside him and turned to leave. But something stopped her, perhaps the weight of 100 silent days. She paused and asked softly, "Would you like sugar today, Babaji?" Karam Din did not answer. He stared into the distance, into memories he would not share. She nodded to herself, took the untouched tea back, and quietly added a spoon of sugar. Unseen by her, he watched her hands tremble as she stirred. She didn't know he saw the tears slide down her cheek. That night, Karam Din lay awake on his charpai, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked overhead. He wasn't a cruel man by nature. He had buried grief in silence for so long that it had hardened into something colder. But that tear, so small, so honest, had cracked something inside him. He remembered Irfan's laughter again. He remembered Rashida's wedding day, how she had walked in with hennaed hands and shy eyes. He remembered how Irfan had looked at her with love. The house was silent still, but now something had shifted. Not much, just a crack, a beginning. The rumors and the storm. The rains came early that year, drenching Bearwall in silver sheets and muddying its narrow lanes. The village thrived on two things, crops and conversation. And when the fields were soaked and work was paused, the conversations grew louder. Whispers had started to form around Rashida. "She's too young to live alone like that," some muttered. "She's always going somewhere in the evenings," others added. "No one visits her, but she still gets letters. Maybe from a man." The truth was simpler than gossip allowed. Rashida had begun tutoring village girls in the late afternoons, just a few at first, then more. She would gather them under the neem tree near the well, teaching them to read, write, and dream. She never charged a rupee. But in a village like Bearwall, where charity and scandal often wore the same face, rumors filled in the gaps. The presence of an old retired teacher, Ustad Bashir, who helped her with lesson plans once or twice, added fuel to the fire. One evening, a sharp knock landed on Karam Din's door. He opened it to find his neighbor, Shafiq, standing in the rain, drenched but grinning. "You should keep an eye on your daughter-in-law," he said with a sly smile. "People are talking." Karam Din's face stiffened. "She's bringing shame, Baba Ji," Shafiq added, leaning in. "Some say there's a man. Some say more than one." The door slammed shut before he could finish. Karam Din stood there, fist clenched, rage rising like a fever. The old man, who had barely spoken to Rashida in weeks, now stormed through the house. She was in the kitchen, making roti. "You leave this house," he bellowed, startling her. She turned slowly, the rolling pin slipping from her fingers. "Pack your things. I will not have filth in my home." "Baba Ji," she whispered, unsure if she had heard him right. "You've dishonored my son's name. You think I don't hear what people say? You want her outside, talking to men, holding secret classes. You think I'm a fool?" Rashida's eyes widened with shock. "I teach girls to read. That's all. You can ask." "Enough," he roared. "I should have sent you away the day Irfan died." The thunder cracked outside, as if the heavens echoed his rage. Karam Din's hand pointed to the door. "Go." Rashida didn't plead. She picked up her dupatta, her sandals, and walked out, not with fear, but quiet dignity. The rain soaked her as she crossed the threshold, but she did not look back. She wandered the village, unsure where to go, until she found herself at the doorstep of Amma Feroza, a wrinkled widow known for housing lost cats and lost souls alike. The old woman opened the door, took one look at Rashida, and said, "Come in, my child. You don't need to say a word." That night, while lightning tore across the sky, Karam Din sat alone in his courtyard. Anger had faded, but something heavier remained. Doubt. He remembered Irfan's love for Rashida, the way she had served tea every day without complaint, the tear she thought he hadn't seen. Could he have been wrong? The next morning, Shafiq's son came by with a schoolbook in hand. "Master Ji, I wanted to return this. Rashida Appa gave it to my sister. Said it belonged to you originally." Karam Din frowned. "You study with her?" The boy nodded. "Yes. She teaches all the girls in our lane. She said Irfan Bhai always wanted a school for children." Karam Din's chest tightened. Later that day, Ustad Bashir came to visit. A man in his 60s, with trembling hands but a mind sharp as a razor. "I came to explain, Karam Din," he said softly. "Rashida only asked for my help with lessons. She wanted to teach girls how to read, to honor Irfan's memory." Karam Din said nothing. But after the old teacher left, he walked to Rashida's empty room and sat on the edge of her charpai. There, beside a neatly folded shawl, lay a thin notebook. Her diary. His hand shook as he opened it. Her writing was small, neat, and painfully honest. "Today he didn't speak again, but I made him tea just the way Irfan liked it. I hope it brought him some peace. The girls read well today. I will teach them numbers next. I think Irfan would be proud. They say terrible things about me, but I will stay silent. I only wish Babaji knew how much I still pray for him." Karam Din closed the notebook with trembling fingers. He had not just thrown her into the rain. He had thrown away her loyalty, her innocence, and her love. And perhaps the last chance he had for redemption. The illness and the revelation. Autumn in Bearwall came quietly that year. The rains had passed, leaving behind cracked earth and cooler winds. But in Karam Din's house, silence once again took root, this time not out of pride, but emptiness. Since the day Rashida left, the old man had stopped going to the market. He barely ate. He sat in his wooden chair in the courtyard, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the neem tree where girls once gathered to learn. A place that had once annoyed him now looked like the last place his son's name had lived on. Days blurred into one another. Then, one morning, as he rose to get water, his right leg gave way beneath him. He crashed to the ground with a thud loud enough to startle the neighbors' hens. He couldn't move. By the time Shafiq and others found him and called the village doctor, half his body had gone limp. The doctor confirmed what they feared, a stroke. Not fatal, but cruel enough to rob him of strength and independence. For a man like Karam Din, it was a death of another kind. That evening, Amma Feroza visited. She stood at the doorway and asked in a flat voice, "Shall I send her, or shall she stay away, as you wished?" Karam Din's lips trembled, but no words came. He merely blinked once, then slowly nodded. Within the hour, Rashida walked in. She wore a simple white shower kameez and carried no bitterness in her steps. She greeted him with a quiet, "Assalamu alaikum, Baba Ji," and began to tidy the room as if she had never left. For the next few days, she cared for him around the clock, washing his clothes, feeding him with her own hands, massaging his lifeless limbs, and keeping him warm. Not once did she mention the past. At first, Karam Din resisted her kindness. When she tried to help him sit, he turned his face away. When she spoke, he closed his eyes. But the body betrays the pride of men. Weakness teaches humility. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rashida adjusted his shawl and said gently, "You're getting better. The doctor said if we keep at the exercises, you'll be walking again." He looked at her then, really looked. Not as a burden, not as a rumor, not even as Irfan's widow. Just as Rashida. His voice, rough with disuse, came out in a whisper. "Why did you come back?" She paused. "Because this is still my home. And because Irfan would have wanted me to." He swallowed hard, guilt sitting heavy in his chest. "I was cruel." She gave a small nod. "You were grieving." They didn't speak of it again. But from that day forward, something shifted. Karam Din, slow and stiff, began taking interest in her tutoring. She would speak of the girls, one who wanted to be a doctor, another who could recite poetry better than most men in the village. He began offering advice, correcting their grammar in her lesson plans, suggesting stories with moral lessons. She would smile and thank him, always respectful, always kind. As the days passed, he found comfort in the rhythm of her voice. When he couldn't sleep, she would read aloud, sometimes from her fawn's old books, sometimes from her diary. And it was during one of those nights, under a dim lantern, that he finally said the words he had buried too long. "I wronged you." She looked up, startled. "I judged you without knowing anything. I hurt you, Rashida." She didn't respond immediately. Then she reached forward and placed a gentle hand over his. "I forgave you the day you let me back in." He turned his head away, ashamed. "You shouldn't have." Her voice was calm. "I didn't do it for me." That night, Karam Din lay in bed, thinking of her fawn, not the loss but the legacy. And for the first time, instead of bitterness, he felt the stirrings of peace. Because in Rashida, he had not just found forgiveness. He had found a reason to live again, a new beginning. Spring came to Bearwall in gentle waves. The mustard fields bloomed bright yellow. The air grew softer, and birds returned to the neem tree that shaded the courtyard of Karam Din's home. Life, like nature, had a way of healing when left in peace. Karam Din could walk again, though with a cane. Each morning, he stepped slowly into the courtyard and sat beneath the tree, now buzzing with the laughter and chatter of village girls reading aloud from slates and worn books. Rashida, in her usual quiet grace, taught them with patience that never wavered. The villagers had stopped whispering. In fact, they now sent their daughters proudly to Rashida's little school. Even Shafiq's own wife had begun attending evening classes to learn how to write her name. It was during one of those warm afternoons that the village council sent for Karam Din. "We like to use the old grain warehouse for a permanent school," said the village head. "Rashida Bibi's effort has shown us what's possible." The old man nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "She will have it. Let be in her fawn's name." The headman paused. "We thought you might say that. In fact, we would like you to be the honorary patron of the school." Karam Din chuckled softly. "An old fool like me?" "You're no fool," the headman replied. "You raised a son who loved books and a daughter-in-law who brings light. That speaks for itself." That evening, when Rashida brought his dinner, Karam Din shared the news. "A real school," he said, pride warming his voice. "For all of Bearwall's girls." Her eyes lit up, but she said nothing, simply folding her hands in gratitude. "Will you name it?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Irfan Memorial School." That was his dream. He nodded slowly. "And now it's yours too." Weeks passed, and the village helped clear and repair the old warehouse. Rashida designed the classroom herself. Colorful rugs for the little ones, bookshelves stacked with donated materials, and a small corner for quiet reading. Ustad Bashir volunteered to teach older girls math. Even the skeptics who once doubted her brought bricks and wood to help build. On the school's opening day, the entire village gathered. Karam Din stood at the entrance, leaning on his cane, wearing a freshly pressed kurta. Beside him stood Rashida, in a light blue dupatta with her fawn's name embroidered at the edge, something she had done by hand over the last few months. The ribbon was cut. Applause followed. Children filed in like birds coming home. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low, Karam Din and Rashida sat side by side under the neem tree. "You've given Bearwall a future," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a widow, not as a burden, but as family, blood or not. She had earned her place beside him. "I don't have much left to give," he said softly. "But what I have, I want to put in your name." Rashida froze. "Babaji, you deserve it. You stayed when others would have walked away. You carried her fawn's light when I nearly extinguished it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't argue. That night, under a pale moon, Karam Din opened Irfan's old wooden chest. Inside were his son's college notebooks, a broken pen, and a faded photograph of Irfan and Rashida on their wedding day. He handed it to her. "You loved him," he said, "but you honored him even more by loving what he loved: people, books, purpose." She held the photo close to her chest. "I just didn't want his name to vanish." "It won't," he whispered. In the months that followed, the school grew, and so did respect for Rashida across villages nearby. Girls from miles away came to study. Volunteers joined. Local newspapers wrote articles. And in the heart of it all sat a house that once knew only silence, now alive with joy, purpose, and belonging. Karam Din, once hardened by grief and blind pride, now spent his days telling stories to the children beneath the neem tree. And every now and then, he would pause, glance at Rashida, teaching nearby, and whisper to himself, "I thought I had lost everything." But sometimes, God gives you another chance, wrapped in humility, carried by a woman you once misjudged. And so, the story of Karam Din and his daughter-in-law became not one of grief, but of redemption and hope.